My name's Noel Sharkey and I'm a professor at the University of Sheffield in the UK, and my job title is Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics and also Professor of Public Engagement. My main research project at the minute is ethical issues in robotics, in fact. So I'm looking at issues with the military robotics and current use. All the work is within a 5-year time span, not deep future. So I'm looking at how police are beginning to use robots and what they could get out of it and what the ethical issues are, and issues in childcare with robotics and issues in elder care. Those are the 4 main areas. Well, it's a very good question, really, and a lot of people ask that, and it's impossible to answer, really. But it's been like that since the beginning of time, almost. Certainly, I've traced it to about 400 BC, and I've got documents talking about how you can awe an audience. And for instance, the first programmable robot that I can find was Heron of Alexandria, and that was about 60 AD. And he discusses in detail how to make the robot such that it's the right size, that nobody could be inside it, because there's always worry about people being inside it. And he talked about how this inspires awe in people. And I think part of it is the idea that you're building an animal, in a sense, or something that moves like an animal. It's no different than the fascination with puppets, except with a puppet you get a reveal, so there's a person actually doing it. But this way you've got something that works on its own. It's like children like cartoons. It's something to do with animation. Now, people say in AI things like, well, it's a kind of creation complex. You want to be a god and you want to create things. But in the 20th century, as far as I can see, when at the beginning of the 20th century, electromechanical robots began then. The word robot came from then. But at that point, there was a great fascination with technology and a lot of scariness. If you read back, I read the Times, the New York Times of the 1920s, 1930s, and you see that technology is moving incredibly fast, and it really worried people. And I think that robots, in a sense, gave technology a public face. And that was part of it, really. That's why people were so fascinated with it. It's still considered to be the peak of technology. There's 2 really interesting robots I've worked with for TV shows, and one was the Asimo robot made by Honda, and that's very exciting because it's it was the first humanoid really to walk, the proper humanoid to walk. It can talk now as well, and it's extremely impressive, but limited. It doesn't really have any artificial intelligence on board. The walking mechanism is the most impressive thing, and it's the little bus that connects the sensors and the motors to the computer, which does many, many thousand loops per second. That's where a lot of the money went into. But I like that a lot because it can climb stairs. But again, it's limited because people see it and they control the whole environment. And the stairs are all of exactly the right size, and they bring their own stairs. But I know that what really impressed me most about it was because I was a bit concerned that these people were puppeting it. So when they weren't looking, I kind of just walked past it. It was balancing on one leg, and I walked past it casually and gave it a big shove to see what would happen, and it hopped away, and that really impressed me. The other one that really impressed me is Reem B, and it's owned by one of the princes in Abu Dhabi, and he has a team in Spain of 30 engineers working on it. He spent several million on it. And it's much thinner than Asimo. It can climb stairs as well. It can talk well. It can lift really heavy weights. It can do face recognition, so it recognizes you when it sees you. And it's just really, really impressive. But again, all of these robots are limited. People don't realize that, you think, oh, we've got walking robots now, they can do all sorts of things. But you take it off a really specially flattened platform and put it into the street, and it will trip and fall almost immediately. So the big advance I'd like to see with these very impressive robots are robots that can get back up on their feet again, really. Well, that's an easy one. That's Japan, in every way, in industry as well. I mean, there's something like 1 robot per 5 members of the workforce in the automotive industry, for instance. It's very, very strongly industrial. But they're also very good at the research side of it. A lot of robots in Japan in many, many different forms. And I can see an extraordinary development happening there, especially with things like the humanoid robots. Like Ishigura's lab, it has the famous Geminoid robot, which is an exact copy of him. It really looks like him. It's made of silicon. And you wouldn't really call it a robot yet. It's more like a puppet in a sense. He wears little electronic things on his face, And so when he opens his mouth or makes an expression, the robot copies his expression. But it's not working on its own through a program. It's remote controlled very much so. After Japan, I think it's Italy has the most in the workforce, that is. Not general sort of entertainment robots, but in the workforce they have the most. And then it's Germany, and then the United States. The United States is quite high as well. Britain, in fact, is one of the lowest in Europe. Lower than Spain, when people are surprised by that, by the number we have, because we have a very good robotics research industry in universities, but not so good in industry. The most interesting research in the UK is really, from my point of view, is happening at the University of West England, I suppose, outside of my own labs, and Sussex and Edinburgh. Those are sort of top centres. But there's a lot of work going on around the place. Some very good work on artificial intelligence. There's work on things like robots that can feed themselves on organic matter. That's one of the big developments. But they do move very slow at the moment. And there's some really interesting research in Edinburgh on insects. And a lot of the research, you see, it's pure research rather than, it's not really about robotics. The insect research at Edinburgh is really about finding out about the insects themselves. There's a lot of research on crickets. And what you do is you make models of some mechanism, like an insect or a bird or something like that, and then you test it and see if the mechanistic model works. There's a lot of biomimetic research in robotics, and there's the big dog by the American military, which looks like a horse really, except with its legs turned backwards. It looks more like two men carrying a wardrobe. I think it was based on that. But biomimicry is good because animals are still the best model of how to get around in the world. Though if you have a tracked vehicle, it doesn't look like a being. But you might mimic biological beings in other ways, such as the way the sensors work or the way it controls. But there are a lot of people in artificial intelligence that say things like, well, you know, flight wasn't based on the bird when you build an aircraft, so therefore intelligence doesn't necessarily have to be based on animals or humans. And the thing is that really flight was based on the bird because it was the understanding of aerodynamics. Okay, they don't flap their wings. Although I know the American military are actually building little robots now that flap their wings, so they're funding robots that flap their wings, so there's a certain amount to that. But when you've got something really successful, like humans and like bees and like antelopes or dogs or whatever, it's a good idea to copy them. There's another very good reason for copying animals from a pure robotics point of view, which is that if you want a robot to work in the human world, like, for instance, where's the door handle? It's been made for humans. So if you build something in human form, it will get around the world a lot easier, around our world, carrying trays, turning on taps. If you build a tiny little robot, it's going to need very, very long arms to reach the tap. Well, there are already robots having a serious impact, but whether you call it a serious impact or not, if the vacuum cleaner robot, that's having quite an impact at present, but it's going to get a bigger impact because they're not great at cleaning at the moment, but they're going to be. I noticed that Dyson, who started off with a robot vacuum cleaner some years ago, his was much too expensive because it was a really powerful, good cleaner. But now he says he's going back into that again. Things are a lot cheaper now. I mean, robots are something like 90% cheaper to make than they were in 1990. But I think the biggest impact at the moment is not a good impact, and that's the military use of robot weapons. We have something like 6,000 to 12,000 robots in Afghanistan, Iraq, but they're doing good things. They're mainly doing bomb disposal, but they're starting to arm them. But then there's the drones in the air, which carry the Reaper, which carries 2 Hellfire missiles. Sorry, the Reaper carries 14 Hellfire missiles, and the Predator, there are about 200 of those being used now for missile strikes. And the remote-controlled robots, there's a man in the loop, and they sit thousands of miles away in the Nevada desert controlling these things over Afghanistan. But they're gradually becoming autonomous, and all the plans you read, there's a new plan 2009 to 2047 that came out in May this year. And already they're talking about advanced autonomy using swarm intelligence. So that is that has a very big impact in some societies, not us because we're the people deploying them. Asimov, who the great science fiction writer, when he started writing about robots, he said there is only one robot plot around, and that's the dystopian plot. And he particularly wrote robots. He had the 3 laws of robotics and things, which he used as a ploy. He wrote stories about robots, and I think a lot of them were really not about robots as such. You use a robot as a foil. Many good science fiction writers, including Philip K. Dick, do this to show you what a human is. So by really focusing on a robot, you find out more about what humanity is because the robot is missing it. So it's not all dystopian, not completely.